I'm Derek Satterley, and I'm talking today about stem cells and how they're fighting leukemia. What are stem cells? Stem cells are non specialized cells that can divide indefinitely, splitting into specialized cells and another stem cell. And so you can see here in the diagram, there's a stem cell that splits into a specialized cell, whether it be a neuron or blood cell, skin cell, uh, stomach lining cell, so on. And beneath it would be a progenitor cell, which is essentially the next step in the stem cell's transition period into becoming a specialized cell. And uh, but um, a stem cell is a non-specialized cell that is able to indefinitely just become any part of the human body and fit into any specific niche of the human body's environment and the ecosystem. So the types of stem cells that I will be specifically talking about today are stromal stem cells and hematopoietic stem cells. Now, stromal stem cells, these do not circulate. These are the structural foundation of the skeletal system and make up essentially all of the connective tissue and the structural integrity of our body. And so you can think of why these uh, do not circulate. These are pretty stationary. But contrast to that, the hematopoietic stem cells, these do circulate throughout the body, and these are the functional property of blood. And these circulate all facets of the human body. And uh, the interesting thing is that these are both produced in bone marrow, and these have the potential for mutating and creating cancer. And so, but where do these stem cells come from? So, these stem cells can come from embryos, uh, uh, the unborn fetuses of humans. And this is why it can be sort of a controversial subject. But today, you're going to be talking about the use of specifically bone marrow and adult tissues that we can skim stem cells from a donor. And so this diagram here shows a femur bone. It shows the hollowed out center of the bone that would consist of the bone marrow. But it's also showing the two types of stem cells, the stromal cells and the hematopoietic cells, and they showing their transition into the specialized cells that they could be. And so you can see here the stromal cells, they transition into bone or cartilage and become, you can see them being a real, of having some structural integrity. But those hematopoietic stem cells above, you can see that they branch off into two different types. Those lymphoid cells, or the myeloid cells. And so those myeloid, those transition and become specialized cells that are, yeah, like I said, the functional property of blood, right? Red blood cells, platelets, white blood cells, and that's the same with those lymphoid cells. Those consist of natural killer cells, other immune immune cells that help the body's healthy function. And so, what is leukemia? Leukemia is a blood cancer, and this directly impacts the body's immune system and its ability to generate white blood cells. Like I wanted to mention, this is the leading cause of death in those in those less than 30, and that's pretty significant. I believe 4 in every 100,000 people are diagnosed with leukemia each year, and that's very significant. So here's another diagram to uh, give some context into what we're talking about. So you see another femur bone, and you see that spongy bone will consist of the actual soft organ of the bone marrow. And so this is that environment where blood cells are produced, and it's the factory of essentially all the cells in our body, because the bone marrow produces all the cells that are become the functional uh, property of our body, and whether it's our skin, our bone, our blood, and so you can see that these healthy stem cells here, these transition into differentiated immune cells, and so they provide a functionality for different niches within our body's immune system. But leukemia stem cells, they do not allow for differentiation, and so our body significantly suffers when we have leukemia, and our body is unable to fight off essentially any sort of biological attack. And so there are 4 main types of leukemia. Right here, we'll start with these first 2: the chronic myeloid and the chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And so chronic would represent the long-term progression the leukemia, meaning that it takes longer to overcome your body. And so myeloid, though, represents the branch of transition of which that's the stem cell is mutated. And so myeloid would be within the myeloid cells. Lymphocytic would be within the lymphoid cells. And so same would be for acute myeloid and acute lymphocytic leukemia. But contrasting, acute would represent it would represent a faster progressing uh, type of cancer. And so, how are these stem cells actually being used uh, within our body, and to help fight this disease? And so, stem cells are actually being extracted from bone marrow donors who have been matched to a DNA matched to a recipient. And so this is actually helping with a lot of degenerative and incurable diseases. I mean, just like leukemia. But in this case, we're talking about being able to use stem cells from a donor with a healthy DNA, and inserting it into someone who has an unhealthy bone marrow environment, producing mutated DNA, and letting those cells letting natural killer cells, natural immune cells target mutated cells, and let the body's immune system fight fight for its own well-being. And so, as I mentioned, this would happen with a bone marrow transplant. Bone marrow environments become mutated, as I mentioned, and for no reason that scientists know. Cancer is something that we are all affected by, and that is still unknown to most researchers, and it that stumps most in all in all medical organizations. And so bone marrow transplants tend to take from the hip bone uh, uh, and from the healthy donor, and inserting the bone marrow within the blood of the skimming off those stem cells and inserting into the blood of the recipient. And so uh, this is uh, uh, this has a great advantage over toxic radiation, which can actually hurt your body's ability to fight cancers when you're actually going through treatment. And so this actually really helps your body's this your body's immune system reach a homeostasis that is less reliant on nuclear medicine, and gives your body a real fighting chance for overcoming a disease using its own using its own ability. And so just want to say thank you for listening, and appreciate